So I'm Christopher Armitage, and I'm here for a special pre-recorded portion of Roll Call for this week. Really excited for our guest, someone who's offered some incredible insight and guidance over the last few months. The few times we've been able to speak, an expert in his field, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. Fadhel.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on your program. My name is Fadhel Kaboub. I teach economics at Denison University here in Ohio, and I'm the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. And when I'm not teaching or doing research, I'm engaging in conversations with people like you who are running for Congress on a progressive platform, supporting the Green New Deal, a job guarantee, Medicare for all. And I'm usually answering the question, how do we pay for all of these great programs without bankrupting the country, without causing inflation, and without that slippery slope that some people talk about, that this is going to lead to socialism and things like that. So I'm happy to discuss any of these things.
I just want to take a second, too, to say how much I appreciate the name Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, because I think that is a brilliant way to describe what we're achieving here. Instead of unsustainable austerity, we're looking for sustainable prosperity.
Wonderful. Yeah. So let's start with what people want, across the political spectrum. So that this is not going to be a political statement. Most people in your district and my district across the country, most people want good paying jobs. They want clean air, clean water, clean soil, healthy economy. They want to have access to healthcare. So we don't have any debate or argument about those goals. The question that most people worry about is, how are we going to pay for all of these wonderful things? And the standard understanding that unfortunately both Democrats and Republicans for decades have kind of forced into the public discourse is the following. We've been told the only way to pay for these things is either for the government to tax in order to pay for it, or the government must borrow in order to pay for it. These are the ways that the government, spends from a conventional standpoint. And we're told, well, if we're going to tax to pay for all of these things, there's going to be massive tax burden on the population, including on the working class and middle class. So now when you tell me the government has to tax me in order to pay for all of this stuff, I say, well, sorry, I'm not so sure about that, because now my livelihood is on the line. If it's not me, if you're taxing my employer, then my job is on the line if my employer goes out of business because you're taxing them so much. So we're essentially forced into this corner that says, well, maybe we should be less ambitious and accept kind of small incremental changes. And if you say, well, the government is going to borrow, it's going to, lead into this other trap that most people usually worry about, which is people think of the federal government in the same way as they think of their personal finances. So if the government accumulates a massive amount of national debt, we fear bankruptcy, right? Because I can't borrow unlimited amounts from my bank. At some point, they cut me off. At some point, I'll run out of opportunities, and I'll go bankrupt. So we fear that risk, right, of borrowing so much money. So then we're forced from this standard perspective that to kind of settle for something more manageable, more modest, more acceptable. In other words, we settle for the status quo. So what MMT, or modern monetary theory, this analytical framework that we're introducing with the Green New Deal and with this progressive agenda, is actually saying this is not how the federal government operates. And it's interesting that with this COVID-19 pandemic in the last few weeks, we've actually discovered how the federal government operates from a financial standpoint. The federal government is not like you and me at the local level as individuals or states or municipalities. For the rest of us, we have to spend responsibly. In other words, I have to work, earn an income in order to spend. And if I wanted to borrow, I could borrow up to a certain point, but that's it. I'm limited. Eventually I'm going to have to work harder, earn more income, or reduce my spending in order to pay my debt. Same is true for cities and municipalities at the local level. They have to tax in order to spend, and if they borrow, they have to tax more and spend less in order to pay their debts. But the federal government doesn't work in the same way. The federal government is the issuer of the US dollar, so it has to create it into the system first in order for us to use it and spend it and borrow it and lend it to each other. So we've discovered the last couple of weeks that the US Congress, the 535 lawmakers in DC, they can get together and set a national priority and say, we're going to address this crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, or a major war like during World War II. And they vote, and if we have a majority, the program is approved and the funding is created to make it happen. So notice what happened when we started, discussing this CARES Act, right? $2 trillion worth of government intervention. Literally, few days before that, a few months before that, a few weeks before that, everybody in DC was saying, we have no money for a Green New Deal. We have no money for Medicare for all. The government is broke. We can't spend. And then all of a sudden, they get together and they spend $2 trillion in the middle of a crisis. Nobody asked, where did the money come from? Who did we tax? Who did we borrow from? Because we didn't, right? That's how the government always spends, except in times of crises. Thankfully, Congress has the right priorities. But during normal economic times, they have very different priorities. And those priorities don't include a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, progressive policies that you and I want to put on the table. And they force us into that other narrative that says, we have no money, we're going to go bankrupt, we shouldn't spend too much. So this framework says the federal government can spend on all the priorities that we want. The concern is not where to find the money. We know where to find the money. It's when 535 people vote on the priority. That's how you find the money. The concern that we should always be concerned about is not the spending and where to find the money. The concern is always, what will this additional spending do to the economy? In other words, will it actually lead to a scenario where we would have inflation? That's the actual limitation. So then the center of the conversation, for example, during World War II was exactly that. It wasn't about finding the money. It was about, we need to spend on this massive war. We're going to do it, right? And remember, World War II came right after the Great Depression, the most miserable time in US history. There was no money to be taxed. There was no money to be borrowed. So the issue was very clear. We created the jobs to build the military, equipment that we needed for World War II. And then the concern was immediately the following. How do we make sure that this massive spending for World War II doesn't lead to inflation or even hyperinflation? So then the question became, what actually causes inflation? And that's the question that we face today. Inflation turns out to be a very complex phenomena that most traditional economists have no clear understanding of its mechanics. And they've admitted that, by the way, in the last few months, in the last year for sure, and including today. So inflation happens when you have a combination of two things. One, when we have a shortage of productive capacity. In other words, today, if we had, X number of billions of dollars worth of demand for food, and our productive capacity, our supply chain wasn't able to deliver that food prices will go up. It's very simple. You have too much demand and not enough supply of food, prices will go up. So that's one scenario. The good news about that scenario is that when we have a shortage of productive capacity, we can produce more of it, right? As long as we have the know-how, the physical resources, the engineering, we create more of it. And the good news is that it creates millions of jobs. So when we talk about renewable energy, when we talk about healthcare, when we talk about all of these resources are producible, right? The second issue that causes inflation that we should worry about, and I think candidates like you really care about, is market power. When you have a few individuals or companies who control a certain industry, they can charge more just because they can. In other words, just because the government lets them. So think of Big Pharma. They charge more because they can, because they're allowed to. Think of, real estate companies. Think of energy companies. These are the key drivers of inflation today. They can drive inflation because they have too much market power. And the solution to this is not spending more or spending less. The solution is to tax and regulate these abusive price setters out of existence. In other words, make their industry more competitive. And that's the strategy. So from an MMT perspective, we're not limited by tax revenues like what most people think. We're limited by the potential inflationary pressure And that potential turns out to be, determined to a great extent by market power or corruption in politics. So when we have 535 lawmakers in Washington, D.C., like you, who are not, bought and, owned by super PACs or big pharma, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, right? Then we have the federal government setting the priorities that would allow us to have good paying jobs, clean air, clean soil, healthcare, all of these things. But in order to do that, we have to be willing to go after the abusive market power of big pharma and Wall Street and all of these companies who are the price setters, who control the economic outcomes. And then sell this narrative to the rest of us, say, well, you can't afford all of these things. That's going to cause inflation. That's going to bankrupt the country. We can't afford these things. So that's really the framework. And it turns out that it's pretty intersectional, everything we're trying to do with these progressive campaigns. We're not saying we're trying to tax the rich. We're trying to tax fossil fuel companies so we can afford healthcare and education, because that's a fallacy. That's a false narrative. It's actually a pretty dangerous narrative when you think about it, because if we in the progressive movement believe that in order for us to afford a progressive agenda, we need to tax some of the wealth of the ultra oligarchs and ultra rich and Wall Street, then this logic leads to the following statement. In order for us to have more to spend on healthcare next year, we need them to be wealthier so we can tax them a little bit, so we can share some of their wealth. So it's a false logic that says in order for us to afford more public services, it's okay for them to be excessively wealthy because we get to share some of it. And that leads to the logic that says, well, our public policy should be geared towards encouraging them and helping them to get wealthier and more powerful so we can share some of their wealth to have public services. Well, what MMT says, wait a minute, we're decoupling the spending and taxing at the federal level. We don't need their money or their permission to have a Green New Deal. We don't need, the money or the permission of the fossil fuel industry or of the ultra-rich, which means we're still taxing them. We should actually tax them more, not because we need their money, but we're taxing them because we want to protect democracy from oligarchy. We're taxing them to reduce inequality. We're taxing Wall Street to reduce speculation and financial instability. We're taxing fossil fuel companies because we want to decarbonize, because we want to clean our society. So this completely transforms the narrative so that we're still going after the dominant key players, the institutions and corporations who are stealing our democracy from us and corrupting the system. And at the same time, we're spending on the priorities that everybody cares about.
Well, I completely agree. It's all about the prioritization of our alignment of our morals and our values, and it's tough to decouple people's traditional mindset, because that's what we get told is that the debt, the national debt, is entirely tied to inflation. There are people who have told me with no doubt in their mind that, one, they believe climate change is not real, it's a hoax, and two, raising the minimum wage by any amount will increase inflation and make everything unaffordable. And when you mention that we increased minimum wage every year for decades, it doesn't seem to move the dial. I wish that being able to present logical arguments like that really could work. But that's the thing, if we can, and ultimately, one of my goals, if elected, is to support policies and ideas and big changes, big evolutions, big opportunities for our nation to grow and develop and be a place where we don't have children dying because they don't have access to health care. Be a nation where we lead the world in green energy. Be a nation where we lead the world in standard of living. Talk about a metric instead of just the Dow Jones. What if we could brag about being the nation with the least poverty? I think that is something that we should really be pursuing. And this is a path towards it. And there's a lot of folks out there who are just told to fear any change. And I think that's part of why when something like COVID happens or the Great Depression, people start to say, well, what, are we going to go bankrupt again as a nation, we're already pretty much at rock bottom. I think we're going to need to try some things. And so I hope that we don't have to hit rock bottom, because that's going to mean a lot more pain and a lot more suffering than should be necessary when we have incredible ideas out there. And so I really appreciate your time today. And do you have anything else you want to leave people with? Anything you want to direct people towards?
Well, there's plenty of resources to learn more about the Green New Deal, to learn more about MMT and this framework for the progressive agenda. Obviously, people like you endorsed by a brand new Congress as a great narrative about how we pay for the progressive agenda. There's lots of organizations on social media that you should be following. Academic organizations like the Levy Economics Institute, the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. There is, Real Progressives. There is, the MMT podcast, Macro and Cheese podcast. There's plenty of resources, audio, visual, interviews, written op-eds. There's plenty of progressive economists that you should be following on social media. Stephanie Kelton, Pavlina Cherneva, Scott Fulweiler, and dozens more in the progressive wing of the economics profession. And we're happy to engage with you. We're happy to answer questions, because we're not going to change the world if it's just, one candidate and their team who understand this framework. We're going to win this by having everyday people who actually understand the narrative and are able to push back against the narrative that comes from the mainstream media or from establishment politicians. So I'm inviting you to empower yourself with the narrative so you can push back, so you can call their bluff. So happy to engage anytime.
Perfect. Hey, thank you so much, Fadhel, for coming on today. And I look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Thank you.
I'm incredibly excited to have my two guests here today. And I will let them introduce themselves. Ammon, do you want to start?
Sure. My name's Ammon Felix. I live in College Place, but I usually just tell people I live in Walla Walla, Washington, because that's, our valley that kind of encompasses a lot of towns. I'm part of the Sunrise Movement here in Walla Walla. We started September of 2 years ago. I've been involved for a little while, and we've really been focusing on a lot of the urban Sunrise movements have a lot of, we're in a rural area. So we do certain different things where we're working, a lot of our focus is on working with farmers and discussion with farmers and how to try to, how to translate what they need into the policy goals that fit under the Green New Deal. So that's something that we've been focusing on a lot recently, but also we're a fairly small hub. So we've mostly just been doing a lot of different actions to get the discussion of climate change out into the public, because it's not really out in the public here right now, but also that's been slowed down and priorities have changed a little bit, in the past 2 months, but everybody knows that.
Yeah, agreed. And I appreciate the work you're doing. How about you, Nora?
Hello, everybody. My name is Nora Henning. I'm the actions lead for Sunrise Spokane and a freshman at North Central High School here in Spokane, Washington. The Sunrise Spokane Hub, we've been growing a lot in the past couple of months, and we recently changed gears given the recent pandemic, and we just hosted our Earth Day Live, a 3-day celebration. We've gotten a lot done, and we're just looking forward to future action.
Yeah, the climate strike that we had here in Spokane, did we get a final count on how many people showed up?
I have no idea. I think police estimated somewhere around 2,000.
That was a very special day for the campaign from our perspective, having the opportunity to go up there. And I mean, if anybody is going to let a younger candidate for office who believes in real climate action speak, I'm grateful the Sunrise Movement's there for that platform. And I'm when I meet a lot of great people in the activist communities, it's mostly silver-haired older folks, and that's because generationally, that's the community that has the most free time and disposable income. And so they're the most likely to lead a lot of these organizations. And so I am so grateful that Generation Z and millennials are stepping up to get involved in the process. And so I want to know more of, what are Sunrise Movement Spokane and Walla Walla planning and working on? What's the path forward for y'all? Let's start with Ammon.
Yeah, so like I said, our hub's pretty small, and so we have a lot of our actions depend on how many people are active, but our core group of people are focusing a lot on, how do we build up the infrastructure for mobilizing people, which all the hubs are doing. But a lot of it has to do with getting discussions going with groups that aren't necessarily immediately aligned with Sunrise. So we talked about with farmers, but also just a lot of other groups in Walla Walla. Our hub is really focused at Whitman, so we've also been focusing on like getting people from, for example, the community college, which are a lot of more young people that are local here, and just really trying to start discussions that way through either like workshops where we set up discussions with people, or through things like the town hall that we had, and organizing those things in partnership with other groups. So the town hall that we had with you was with DSA, which, Sunrise and DSA are pretty much aligned. But then also, one of the events that we're still hoping to do is the Applied Sciences in Sustainable Agriculture course at the community college. I'm good friends with the professor there, and she has a lot of connections with farmers that, normally might not sit down at the table with us because, they just think we're way out there. But organizing in partnership with them, we can have really good discussions and sit down and talk where we might otherwise not be able to. So a lot of our plans are around that. And then just trying to keep up on like sending out newsletters and keeping people involved with how they can act right now in the face of the pandemic. Because, if we can keep people involved in being activists during this time, when we can act more as Sunrise, like in groups and visiting people, that's something that people, have still been doing, but in different ways. And then we can take that, organizing and activism that's come up from being in this pandemic and show people that, we can act as a state or as a country to solve a really huge problem collectively. And so then we can use that as a really good way to direct people towards these other huge, massive issues that we're all facing when it comes to climate change and inequality. So that's not super concrete plans right now, but I hope that answers the question.
No, it definitely matters. Just finding building organizations isn't easy. That's one thing we've learned over the course of this campaign. Is it, especially when it's a volunteer-led organization, you don't have a lot of leverage to say, hey, you didn't get that thing done that I needed you to get done. So there's a lot more of a collaborative mentality and more people come and go. And just keeping people around takes up a lot of the energy of that organization. So Nora, what about Spokane Sunrise?
Well, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but we just finished our super huge action of Earth Day Live. Sunrise personally hosted day one. We're really focused around the youth and their demands, especially relating to education. So our Earth Day strike day one was focused around 3 demands: adopting a K-12 climate curriculum in Spokane, 100% electric bus fleet, and installation of solar panels on all new or remodeled schools. So we had a virtual town hall with 2 members of our school board, Director Lockwood and President Haynes, where we did get them to agree to do several things, not everything we wanted, but hopefully we will be creating a student committee to focus on climate actions. And I'm trying to push them to have a student advisor for just climate action. So we're looking forward to moving forward in that relationship.
That's a great plan. I think the way that Sunrise is focusing on meeting with elected officials and finding ways to support candidates and elevate candidates is crucial. Because the fact is, the fossil fuel industry, Wall Street banks, they put a lot of energy into influencing the outcome of elections. Companies like Facebook have someone whose job it is to decide what campaigns they're going to donate to and to have conversations with those elected officials. That's one of the biggest problems with our campaign finance system is you essentially buy time from politicians. And that time where you get to talk to them, it's time for you to influence them and their thoughts on a subject. And, one of the things I've really learned while traveling up and down this district, our campaigns visited, I think, about 15 to 20 towns across this district. And places where no congressional U.S. House candidate or congressional candidate has visited before. And the people say they want clean air and water. They're just concerned that anytime we try to address those, it's at their expense, that it's going to make them lose their jobs or it's going to make their life more difficult in some way. Would either of you feel comfortable maybe addressing that a little bit? I know that's a bigger question. I probably could have sent your way before, but just off the top of your head.
Yeah, one idea that I've been like thinking a lot about is that, you know, a lot of our things that we're going to need to do to combat climate change when it comes to resource use, like for people to support the sort of things that we need to do when it comes to adopting green energy, when it comes to cutting emissions and using less fossil fuels, people need to feel that it's fair. So when it comes to people that are insanely rich, like that burden needs to be equal upon them. But it also people need to feel that it's the burden's equally spread throughout society. Because if people don't feel that they're doing this much work, everybody else should be doing this much work, then people aren't going to buy into it. But if we can show people that we can set up a system for this transition that is fair to every single person, then people are much more likely to say, yes, I do want to help with that. Yes, I do want to work towards that. That's one thought that I had about it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, I would say that's kind of the beauty of the Green New Deal, you know, is to create a livable future and good jobs for everybody, you know, especially frontline communities. So people living in these towns, especially in our area, suffering from wildfires, they won't think that it's going to be at the expense of themselves, because the Green New Deal will hopefully try to take the pressure off those frontline communities.
Exactly. You know, showing people that they're not being left behind, that they're not forgotten, and that this can be something that benefits all of us. You know, throughout history, we've come together to do incredible things. When we entered World War II, we didn't say, how are we going to pay for it? What taxes are we going to institute? Who's going to be put out? No, we put America to work to tackle an existential crisis to humanity. Same thing for, you know, when we put a man on the moon using technology that was weaker than most calculators today. We can address climate change. We can have clean air. We can have clean water. We can have a future where our grandchildren can go fishing, and we can do it while getting Americans quality jobs. You know, it's incredible, the legacy of the Green New Deal. I've met people in this district who consider themselves strong conservatives, but they still they still speak positively about policies such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, a New Deal policy, and places within this district benefited from New Deal policies considerably. The opportunity when speaking to those farming communities to mention that we can bring new people into farming, that, you know, the average farmer right now is a 58-year-old man, just like with people in trade unions. It's an aging population. There aren't young people going into those jobs. We can do that as a nation. We can facilitate people towards that. There are plenty of people in cities who would love the opportunity to learn how to get into sustainable agriculture. And these same communities like the idea of independence. They like the idea of not relying on other countries for our food and our water and natural resources and energy supply. These all come together. And so we're right here. To be clear, we're fighting for the right thing. We're fighting for something that matters, and we have a great plan. It's just about how many people we can communicate that to, how many conversations we can have.
Yep, we're on the right side of history.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully we can keep acting. Now, I'll ask you both something. What's the path forward if we end up with people at the top of the federal government who are really against, you know, aggressive climate action or are just aiming for 2050? What is that? Is there any talk within the Sunrise Movement about the 3 to 5 year plan with a government that isn't very active?
I don't know as far out as 3 to 5 years. I do know that we do have plans for right after the next presidential inauguration in January. We want to have the biggest mobilization of people out in the streets in history, the biggest climate mobilization. So in January, we want to have people out in the streets saying that ideally it would have been, you know, Bernie Sanders, Sunrise endorsed him. But no matter who it is, we want to say that we're still here. We're still fighting. You can't forget about us. We're going to keep fighting for this no matter who's in office.
I like that a lot. A lot of members of our campaign, including myself, are members of the Sunrise Movement. And while I haven't been able to attend any of the hub training, some of our people have. And they speak so highly about the mental aspect of Sunrise training, how it teaches people and how to connect with one another and communicate and stay involved in their community, that our cause is bigger than any one candidate or any one election, and we have to keep fighting. That's just the only option. You don't just throw up your hands and say, okay, I guess millions or even billions of people are going to be misplaced and possibly die, and the safety of humanity is at risk. What are we going to do? You just get out there and you keep putting in the work. And I think a lot of other movements could take a note out of Sunrise's movement in that respect. So
one of the biggest reasons, probably the biggest reason I'm part of Sunrise is a lot of the actions that I do in my own life are very, in our community or even just in my individual life. But Sunrise is a chance to participate in the political change that we can see. And that's where the systemic change is truly going to come from. That's where the systemic change can be changed the fastest, is through political policy.
Yeah, I agree. And those down ballot races are such a crucial part of it. And that's why I've made a commitment, if elected, you'll see me at school board candidate events and city council and every level possible. I want to be there to support candidates, regardless of political party, who are ready to take things like universal health care, climate action, living wage, worker safety, organized labor. I want to be there for candidates that will support those policies that help people, regardless of political party, regardless of ideology, at every single level. Because it's amazing even what you can do get done at the city and state level too, outside of just the presidency or Congress. Now, I think we have about 5 minutes until we go to something else, and I'm not sure if we're closing it out. I'll have to check on that. But we have 5 minutes right now till our next break. What do each of you want me to know if I get elected? And I promise you'll be able to get a hold of me really easy, but still, let's start with Nora.
What I want you to know. Well, I want you to know that the voices of the youth are behind you, that we're on the right side of history here. We're fighting for something that matters. We're fighting for all people. We're not fighting for ourselves. And then I think that's really important for you to just keep that message and keep moving your party to, push for the Green New Deal and push for climate action, and not forget that is like the most important thing here, and to just not just, support it yourself, but push your colleagues to do the same.
Appreciate it. How about you, Ammon?
Yeah, I don't know if I have the words to put it together right now, but there's a lot of people. I'd say a majority of people, especially in our areas and the rural areas around here, that very much feel left behind. That feel disengaged from the political process, and that feel like it has nothing to do with them. So to be really creative to figure out how to reach those people, to speak with them, and to always keep them right next to you when you're thinking about how to make those decisions, is those people that are either underrepresented and disenfranchised, or are just feel that the political process has nothing to do with them, and so are disengaged and even hostile towards it.
I appreciate that. I'm definitely going to keep that in mind. And, I want both of you to know, I visit a lot of different groups and organizations, talk to a lot of people, and by a significant margin, and this is being recorded, it's going to be out there public, I want this said and on the record, the Sunrise Movement has the most passionate and well-informed communicators of any organization I've ever been associated with or interacted with. That over the next few years, I want to see the 15, 16, 17, 18, all members and age groups of the Sunrise Movement running for offices here in Eastern Washington, here at the state level, maybe even at the federal level. And and I'm going to be there to support that because I turned 28 a few days ago. And early on in this race, I got told, you're too young, you're too this, you don't have enough money, you don't have enough power, you haven't paid your dues. You show up, you show that you're committed to your community, you talk to people, you have the hard conversations, you break out of your echo chamber, you make the case for what you believe in, and you stand by your morals and values like a badge of honor. And that's how we change the world. So I appreciate both of you a lot in the work that you do.
Hello, everyone. This is Mikey Stransky, president of AFSCME, Council 28, also known as WFC, the Washington Federation of State Employees. Hope this finds you guys well tonight. So just wanted to talk real quick about kind of everything that's been going on. As you know, we're still in the middle of this pandemic. And as Chris and I discussed, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, really what we're seeing right now is that the people that are keeping our society alive and keeping everything moving are, these essential workers, your nurses, your custodians, your public transportation drivers, those sort of jobs, which in turn are the people that our union often represents or are represented by other unions. And at this time, more than ever, we're seeing the importance of having a strong union that can make sure that workers are getting, the PPE that they need, that they can be safe during this time, and that, again, they can continue to provide the vital public services that, we need, again, to just keep society moving. So with that, one of the things that's really important to myself and our members as a public sector union is making sure that we have people in Washington who are going to look out for the working class and look out for the workers, and specifically public sector workers, to make sure that, they're being taken care of, that they're not going to be putting their lives on the line and then have their health insurance cut or have their hours cut or be laid off or something like that as a thank you for doing these essential services. So to that end, I'd like to announce tonight that AFSCME Council 28 has officially endorsed Chris Armitage for the CD5 congressional race. We're very excited about Chris. We think that he will be an amazing advocate and fighter for all of the working class, not just public sector people, but everyone in the working class. And he will make sure that, people are able to get an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, that people will, still have health insurance and all of those important things that all of us, need to get through our lives. So with that, once again, I want to congratulate Chris on receiving the endorsement. I look forward to working with him over the next couple months, and I'm really looking forward to election night in November, when we can officially say that we are sending Chris Armitage to Washington. Thank you.
I'd love to hear from both of you exactly what the wish list looks like at the local, state, and federal and global level. What does the change we want to see look like?
That's a lot. That's a lot. I think definitely on the
Sorry about
global
that.
level, that's like just wanting, general everybody being on board, and everybody saying, like, not getting caught in these like little tiny compromises, but everybody getting on board and saying, like, we're all going to do this. We're all going to work on this. Cause like you mentioned earlier, when everybody puts their mind to that, I mean, so much can be done. So much can really be done globally.
Yeah. What about, at the individual level too, Ammon? What kind of changes do you want to see?
That's the one I probably think about the most. I'm definitely learning a lot when it comes to the political process and how, figuring out what policies actually create the change that you want. If there's one thing that I've heard a lot of farmers bring up, I guess this is a more of a community or state level that I think about, is a lot of farmers see a problem with a lot of the policies around climate change and how it affects them, because a lot of them feel that the consumer choices often drive the kind of products that they end up producing. And so that's kind of another interesting angle to look at it from, because a lot of our policies go towards controlling what farmers are doing. But they often feel that they're forced into what they're producing as commodities and different things like that because of what the market's demanding. So that might be, trying to look at the ways that what levers we're pulling, I guess, to make the changes that we want, because there's a lot more levers to pull out there than people think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much in our daily lives.
What about you, Nora?
Wow, there's so much.
Run with it. Just have with it whichever one of those 10-part question catches your eye.
So I would say starting with just like the local, state, and federal level, to elect people in office who not only support the Green New Deal, but just admit that climate change is real, that it's human caused, and we need to do something about it now. You'd think that would just be like a thing that would happen, but surprisingly, it's not. So that would be the first step. In Spokane locally, I think that as a high school student, most of my friends barely know anything about climate change. They don't know wildfires are so bad in Spokane. They really don't know anything about it, except that it's that thing that's happening elsewhere that I don't really have to know about. So I would want to teach kids in school, starting in young as kindergarten, have it incorporated into all subjects. So not just in science, learn in that one unit in biology, this is what climate change is. Okay, we're done with that now. Just have it embedded in all different subjects, so that hopefully the next generation will be raised to be a little army of climate activists. I would want the Green New Deal to pass, obviously. I would want to create millions of jobs in sustainable energy, move completely towards net zero, hopefully in the next 10 years. I can't think of much more right now, but they're all floating up in my brain somewhere.
Sorry, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so some of the things, the number one thing in my mind is everyone should have a garden. If everyone had a garden and was growing their own food, our economies would be, and people really appreciate that would bring people's focus to their local community so much more. And I think it would just change a lot of people's perspectives and how we use resources. And that would kind of trickle on up, I feel like. But also staying informed and engaged on political issues and on climate change, because, when you're informed and when you're engaged, when you hear misinformation, you can correct that immediately. And a lot of times there's people out there that don't know what climate change is, or they're kind of putting myths out there or saying different things. And when you can say no, this is what's happening, and I know these facts, when you can be there and ready to correct those sorts of things, you can help discussions go in a more helpful direction. And then, just like you said, Nora, about having political leaders that actually admit that this is happening. I've been at events where political leaders have pretty much just said said that it's not happening. And that's just, I feel like we're so far past that.
Well, I think scientific literacy needs to become one of the top priorities educationally in this country. It is just amazing to me that year after year we first went to war, right after 9/11, when I was 9 years old, and we're still at war. Someone born on 9/11 would be old enough to enlist, almost old enough to drink now. And we continue to dump those trillions into war, but why aren't we investing in having the greatest education system in the world? Because I think that would get to the root of a lot of this too. So much of the xenophobia and, scientific, lack of understanding, anti-intellectualism, the people who watch 10 hours of YouTube videos and think they know more than somebody who has spent their whole life studying something in practical ways, that's something we need to combat. That's a danger. That's a risk. That's an existential risk. Greed and ignorance are a greater threat to our existence as a species than any asteroid or climate event. Is our inability as a group to act in our own best interest. And
I completely agree. I might be slightly biased as the daughter of two professors, but education is everything. You know, if we could just educate everyone to know the real truth, and they wouldn't just buy into these awful conspiracy theories like Trump saying that the Green New Deal will take away airplanes and people won't be able to eat meat anymore, you know, just like misinformation, that would just completely change our entire world.
Yeah, if there's one kind of habit that I think people should get into when it comes to being climate literate, energy literate, science literate, is just like, you know, when you hear anything, you need to go and like research that and find the root of it. If that's kind of a common habit that people have to like, no, before that like gets filed away in my brain, you know, I'm going to double check that. If people had that habit, which I feel oftentimes comes with when you've done research or when you've done, been involved with stuff like that, that's a habit that comes with that. But that can help, stop a lot of that misinformation too.
Well, so I'm going to soapbox a little bit about something I love. And while I do that, I'd love for you to think. So I'm going to answer this question first, and you two can think about your answers while I talk. Something about climate action, a change that would come with it, or, some facet of it that people should be excited about, that would be interesting, or something really to look forward to in our future beyond just having a livable planet and more jobs. And so for me, I think there are two main things I have. One is investing in rail infrastructure across the country. I'm not saying stop flying, but for most people, we're finding out during this pandemic, you can telework. And traveling by train is a process that is far better for the environment, a lot more leisurely. And I think it'd be really incredible if more people could travel. If it was cheaper to travel across the nation by train, maybe it takes a few days or a week or two, but you're able to telework the whole time, and that's how we go around. And that's a future I get very excited thinking about. And the other one is a facet of a Green New Deal that our campaigns talked about a lot. That would be an offshoot of the Civilian Conservation Corps, which would be the American Horse Corps. We have about 80,000 wild horses in the country, and a lot of them have to get put down because there's just not enough resources in the areas they're at. I think it'd be really interesting to hire tens of thousands of Americans with full-time jobs, living wage, enough where they could, if they choose to have a family, they could raise that family on a single income and have a safe job where they have workplace protections. And that civilian horse corps would be trained in skills such as animal husbandry and resource stewardship. And these folks would be in squadrons, you could say, non-law enforcement or military related, but in squadrons or groups. And you say these 1,000 horse corps members, their job is to help replenish the natural succulent population in this area, or the natural bison population in this area, different animals and natural resources. And I think a side effect to that would be connecting us with our environment. As the Boy Scouts, I'm an Eagle Scout, and I loved being a part of the Boy Scouts. And when they were first founded, it was really meant to be a paramilitary training organization where they train young people to walk around with backpacks and know how to get themselves around in the wilderness. But what they ended up doing, incidentally and inadvertently, was creating a generation of conservationists. That used to be a conservative trait, was to say, of course we... Oh, nice. And that's, that instills that idea that there's very conservative people involved with the Boy Scouts who still care about protecting our public lands and being good stewards of our environment because of that experience. So those are two facets of climate action that I think could really be something to look forward to. Nora, do you want to go next?
Sure. So first thing that I just thought of when you were talking is transportation. So I spent a summer with my family in Europe, and obviously in Europe, they don't really like cars very much. I don't know if you've ever been to New York, but it's like the opposite of that. The streets are kind of used for walking, like people walking, not cars, and the cars people that have to like get around the people. It's totally opposite. And they have these high-powered trains that move like 300 miles an hour. We got from like Germany to Paris like overnight, you know, and that's like mind-blowing to me that, you know, just the way that I learned to think was totally wrong, you know, like there's a better way of doing this that's better for our environment. So that's one thing that I would look forward to. And also, when I think of this, I kind of just think of it as a kid still, kind of growing up, having my childhood during the climate crisis. There's a lot of things that I couldn't do. You know, I recently, the past couple of years, because of wildfires, we haven't been able to like go to amusement parks, go swimming outside, you know, kind of just be a kid. We've kind of had to like stay inside. And so to people who are kind of like, well, what would it give me? I just say it would kind of just give you your life back. You know, it would kind of give you a sense of normal that we haven't had in a long time, and that kids today just kind of think is normal, and it's not normal. So I would just look forward to being able to enjoy the outdoors again without having to worry about it being destroyed every second.
Very good point. How about you, Ammon?
Yeah, the thing that kind of comes to mind is like really relocalizing our focus when it comes to just where our priorities are at. So I imagine like with things like the Civilian Conservation Corps, with things, you know, those very practical infrastructure programs, very practical jobs programs, those are going to be jobs that are building infrastructure, often, you know, giving those jobs will be building infrastructure using the people from that area. And hopefully like, you know, connecting people to that area more, making people more invested in their own communities through doing work in their own communities, through helping to build that, and helping to foster a sense that we're all building something together. Because I don't feel that most people feel that way. I think most people feel very lonely and would like to be part of building something a lot greater and building a sustainable society that's healthy and, you know, and gives back to itself instead of just destroying itself. Like that is a worthy goal that I feel like everybody would want to be a part of. And I have a lot of like, you know, idealistic dreams of, you know, all the streets being lined with like fruit trees, and you talk about the solar panels and, you know, like having people that know their neighbors, you know, and yeah. So a lot of it has to do in my mind with that action that's focused on your own community and having government support to make those things happen.
I love it. That's exactly it. What could be better for strengthening your community than actually buying things that are locally grown and being self-sufficient? We were in Republic a few months ago, and someone there was talking about the benefits of privatizing things and how they don't like, you know, they're very small government-y, which is fine. There's a place for small government. But then a gentleman got up, and he hadn't spoken the whole time, and he asked if he could interrupt. And he went and he flipped the light switch on and off in the room. And there was a Republican state central committee member there, and she was the one kind of pushing back against a lot of things. And he flipped the light switch on and off, and he said, they have tried to privatize our power here so many times, and it just can't be done affordably. So I'm grateful. We wouldn't get to live here. We wouldn't have sewage. We wouldn't have power if those were run for profit. I'm glad that we're able to do that. But those communities could actually be more self-sustaining. Our rural communities, it's not profitable to have roads there. But independence, self-sustainability, those are achieved through this cause, through our energy systems and our food systems. And so I'm really excited to see the kind of future that we can build together. And I appreciate you both coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.